All right, guys. So it's me. I'm back and doing another solo episode of What's My 100%. I feel like I got a little accustomed to having someone in here with me again, and feels a little strange to just be recording with myself, but here I am. And I actually am a little bit excited and maybe a little fiery even about what I want to talk about today. And it's funny. So I saw something last week that I've been just thinking about and having conversations about in some of the groups that I facilitate. And it just feels like one of those things where maybe some dots have been connected for me on a little bit of what is it, like a sticking point of where we are societally, or maybe a blind spot that we have that I think we really need to start having some honest conversations about. And on this one, I'm going to be inviting my sisters in a little bit. And that's not me saying that my brothers aren't obviously invited to the conversation, but it's like me calling us in on doing some work around like where I think we could benefit from being really, really honest with ourselves about what I think many of us as women are not taking full ownership of in terms of the place where we are creating stagnancy and certainly our own levels of oppression and participating in structures that we say that we want to see eradicated or no longer in place, but that we are sort of perpetuating these structures, right? So let me back up and tell you all a little bit of a story on how I started to connect some of these dots last week. So I was sitting scrolling through Instagram when I saw this reel that I didn't think that much of at first, but then I was so unbelievably activated by after I was looking at it for a few minutes. So here's what the reel was. It was a woman who, I don't know, I just stumbled upon it. It wasn't someone that I follow, but she was telling the story with some really beautiful dramatic music about the decision that she had made to leave her marriage and how painful the decision had been to choose herself, and that she had a 1-year-old child at the time that she made this decision, but that she had been in I believe what she described as a loveless, but I know for sure she described as a sexless marriage for many years to a good man, and that she fell in love with someone else. And more than it being about this other person that she fell in love with, she decided that she needed to choose herself, even though she knew that it was going to mean that she would conceivably be exiled by her community and her family and, hurting a good person. But that at the end of the day, this had been the truth for her. And she, I guess, fell in love with this other person, married this other person, and had a baby with him, right? So I really didn't think that much of the reel as I was watching it. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then I looked over to the right in the comments section, and y'all, there were 17,000 comments that were some of the most, whew, just harmful. I'm going to say harmful, vitriolic, aggressive, just hate filled, really, comments that I like clutch my pearls. Like, I just was like, oh my God, kind of took my breath away, genuinely. And it was just so much, you know, and it's not even, and I don't know, I think because I looked over and saw 17,000, and it's sort of a strange thing to see 17,000 comments on any post, maybe. I don't know. I got curious, so I went in there to look, but it's not even just that there were so many comments, but there were also so many likes on comments that were just made me sad to see, to be honest, right? And what I was so struck by was how much the comments were in the vein of, you know, where has shame gone? How are you not ashamed of yourself? You are a mother. I feel sorry for your children. Um, what kind of a person leaves a good man for no reason? You're a bad person. But here's the biggest comment that I was so struck by that really started to connect some dots for me in terms of something that I think is a blind spot. Um, for all of us, but it's a lot of how we are socialized. And the comment that I think was so prevalent was, "You are so selfish," right? And most of the time, that comment in this particular post was made towards this woman by other women, right? It is so selfish for you to say, "This marriage isn't what I want for myself anymore. I'm choosing something different." Um, and that is a selfish thing for a woman, and in this case, a mother to do. Now, here's why I was so struck by this. If you think about what those making that comment were essentially saying was, you should stay in this marriage, this relationship, even when it is not aligned with the truth of, you know, what you want for yourself. I would imagine on some level, her partner is not feeling a great deal of fulfillment and alignment with truth on a deeper level if they've been, as she described it, in a loveless, sexless marriage um for many years. But, to me, I think all of these things are open for debate, right? Well, maybe not for other people. I think within our own lives, we can certainly debate what feels true. But, and this is a large part of my point, I don't know that we get to debate what is true for other people in their lives and what they should be doing. But there were a whole lot of people who felt unbelievably qualified and justified and maybe entitled to tell this woman what should have been the best course for her life. And, listen, maybe many could make the argument that she is opening herself up to that feedback when she shares about something personal on the internet. And okay, fair. But also, I think there's just something in this thing of how we hold what it is for someone to be selfish or good or prioritizing of other people or not. And more specifically than people, I'm going to bring it into a more gendered space of women and the way that women are socialized to be good girls, to self sacrifice, to pour into others in a way that is often out of alignment with what is the truth of what they are feeling. And it's interesting, in one of the groups that I was facilitating this week, someone was saying, because we were having this whole conversation about like good, and is good something that we want to continue to strive for, like being a good person? What does that mean? How do we determine what it is to be a good person? Who's the arbiter of good? But how much we are just socialized from so early on to defend against being perceived by others, and honestly, maybe ourselves, as a bad person, right? And, I tend to be, I don't even know if I want to say like in the minority on this, but I don't necessarily believe that there are, quote, bad people. I know, don't come for me. I think there are deeply wounded people. I think there are people who are, um, acting out their pain in society and in relationships. I think there are people who have forgotten the truth of who they are, but I don't believe that any of us are beyond redemption. I'd certainly be in the wrong line of work if I did, but I don't think that's true. And I think that so many of us have had, periods in our life, seasons in our life where when we look back on them, there were ways that we could have been defined as a, quote, bad person. And maybe that just meant that we were a little bit lost or um, unable to show up in integrity with the person that we wanted to be. But I don't know that that means that we were fundamentally a bad person. And I am including myself in that because I think that that is true for all of us if we get really honest about like all of the chapters and ways that someone in our story, we might be the villain of their story, if we go back and like ask them to take an honest inventory of all of our interactions. But I certainly know that that is the case for me. And what I was saying about that group that I was facilitating is that we were talking about what it is to be good and certainly to be a good woman. And that there are so many ways that, what this person was saying, that in order to be perceived as good, we have to erase fundamental aspects of who we are. And that, if I had $1 for every should statement that is often driving, our actions, right? Like, I feel like people talk to me often about like the things that I should do, or I should do this, or people are going to feel some kind of way about me not doing this, right? Um, and when it comes to how we are socialized as women, I was listening to Gabor Mate in an interview the other day, and he was talking about this study of 2,000 women over a 10-year period, and how um, women who suppress the truth of their unhappiness, their lack of fulfillment, who, in this context, he was talking about in marriage, but these women that aren't being honest about how unhappy they are, either with themselves or their partner, but they're suppressing the truth of how they feel. I don't know how they gauge that, but this is what he said, that those women were 4 times more likely to die than women who expressed their unhappiness, right? And so what he was talking about is living authentically, and that there is a cost when we do not live authentically. And that here's the thing, and this is like the big honest with ourselves truth that I think we have to come into alignment with. There's a way that we talk a lot about authenticity, and that we should be attempting to live more authentic lives. And, we could have a larger conversation about what that means exactly. But there's a way that I have seen that, society can often offer a lot of pushback when people do that, right? Like, when you are honestly in the space of recalibrating around, I'm no longer going to be in this space of self abandonment. I'm going to put down the people pleasing practices. I'm going to say no when it's not something that is an authentic yes for me. Um, there's a way that people, in my experience, start to perceive that as selfish, or as you um, not taking other people into account, sometimes, in your narcissistic tendencies. And there's just a way that I think that there's a lot of judgment that comes with that, that I think a lot of times we're not necessarily honest with ourselves about, right? And, you know, I have seen so frequently that you can't convince me that this is not the case when we talk about the cost of that to women. And listen, I don't have statistics and studies in front of me to back this up, but I know I could find them because I know that this is a case. Um, when we are not living authentically, when we are not tending to our life force and showing up for this life in a way that is in alignment with what we came here to do, that does not come without a cost. And it becomes this thing of like suppressing the aspects of ourself, um, in a way that like it starts to manifest in sickness and in resentment and in us just being a person that, when we look at the way that we are showing up and how we are experiencing the world and how other people are experiencing being in relationship with us, so often we're just showing up as someone that we're not really proud to be. And I can certainly be the first to raise my hand on that. And I think that there's so much, whenever I talk about things with a lot of, you know, I was going to say like certainty, and I don't think I have certainty on anything. Anything I'm saying right now, it's like, ask me again tomorrow. I might have a completely different opinion. And I think whenever there's something that feels like it's a very solidified truth within my heart, it's normally because it's been a part of my path that I've walked myself, that I've had a reckoning with, that I truly believe this is the truth because I've had some experience with this, right? And so I know for me, when I was in a relationship dynamic that was not in alignment with truth, there were all of these ways that the person that I was showing up as, certainly in that relationship, but just like in my life and how I felt in my body and what was manifesting in my body was not healthy. And when I say healthy, I'm saying that quite intentionally because it was starting to make me sick to live out of alignment with truth. And I think that that is something I see so frequently, that when I am having all of these, illnesses that are manifesting, or that I have anxiety that I just really have struggled with for a long time, or all of these ways that it can manifest, I think it is often my experience that there's some way whenever there's something that we're sort of chronically struggling with, and this is just my belief system, that the body does keep the score. And there's a way that that is the manifestation of some way that we are living out of alignment with our soul's truth, right? Um, and it's interesting because I think this thing of being selfish, I've started to realize is a cage that we as women put ourselves in. And certainly we do it because we've been conditioned to do it for a lifetime. But I think that it's really important for us to start challenging what it means to be selfish. And that when we are not living in alignment with our soul's truth, and when we are not tending to the work of cultivating our own authentic life force, what ends up happening is we start to have a need to extract life force from other people, right? And so we start to feel entitled to other people's energy. We start to feel shortchanged when they're not showing up for us in the way that we believe that they should in any given moment. We start to manipulate and, just do all of these things that like are not in alignment with the highest version of who we are in an attempt to extract energy and get those needs met, when a lot of times it's just an indication that we are not pouring into ourselves, right? And I think that is often true of whenever we are experiencing resentment. If I am talking to someone about the way that they are just like really filled with resentment about someone else and the way that they are not showing up for them, I have yet to experience it being the case that I was not taking care of myself well. I was either, not making sure that I was giving myself adequate time to pour into myself, to take care of myself well, to do the things that I long to do that maybe I'm putting off because I'm putting everyone else ahead of me. And I think there's a way that this martyr energy that we have just been socialized for centuries to believe is what equates to us being a good woman is something that we've got to start putting down. Because I think, there's this thing I heard Elizabeth Gilbert saying, where she was talking about like the times in her life when she has been the most damaging to other people were when she didn't know how to meet her own needs herself. And I think there's a way that I talk a lot about personal responsibility, and that, you know, it is actually not anyone's responsibility to meet your needs but you. You can certainly make requests for support. You can certainly have a community of people that you are co-creating a life with, because we are interdependent beings. But to me, it's just a very separate thing to believe that anyone is responsible for my needs, fundamentally responsible for my needs outside of myself. And the reason that is because if I have a dependency on anyone outside of myself to meet any need that I cannot meet for myself, that dependency starts to become a maladaptive way that I am showing up in this life. And it's sort of, if you think about it in terms of a substance addiction, if I am dependent on any substance and I believe that I need that substance for my survival, I will start to show up for this life in some maladaptive ways in an attempt to maintain the relationship with that substance. And this is so often what happens in our relationship dynamics, right? And so if you think about, like, if we stay with that sort of metaphor around addiction, if I have a dependency on this substance, I'm going to do whatever I need to do, oftentimes acting out in some unbelievably selfish ways to maintain the relationship with that substance. But what ends up being true is when I believe that I need other people to be whatever I believe that I need them to be for me, I start to show up similarly in those same maladaptive and, I would argue, selfish ways, right? Not really thinking about how the other person is experiencing this moment, not taking into account the other person's capacity. There's just all of these ways that when we are not taking care of ourselves well, I believe it's, that old adage of like putting the oxygen mask on yourself first. We're not actually able to show up in our relationships and meet other people in the way that I think that we want to. And, It's interesting because I was having a conversation with a few girlfriends last week, and we were talking about, oh, just this thing of community. And I think this becomes important because there's all of these ways that I think there are tricky ways that some of our power over dominance ways of meeting one another relationally show up. And really, what I mean when I say that is our codependency. And that becomes like, I believe that I have the right to control other people in an attempt to make myself more comfortable. And so, what I was talking to these girlfriends about was, they were talking about some of the ways that they experience, spirituality and, some of New Age spirituality as not being rooted in community and maybe being a little bit self centered. And so, I'm like, oh, I had already in the week been having this whole epiphany around selfish and it being a cage that we put ourselves in. But it really led to an interesting conversation for me because I think there's all of these ways that we will decide a lot of times that people need to prioritize community in a way that we feel they should prioritize community, which to me becomes another way that we're in sort of these power over structures, which is not actually someone showing up in community in a way that feels authentic to them or showing up from an authentic desire within them to show up. But we've decided that that's what they need to do versus really taking responsibility for, am I being the change that I want to see? Am I showing up in community in the way that I think should be prioritized? And when we do that, I think, as is the case with so many other ways, that when we're in sort of power over dominance based structures, we start to show up in some really judgmental, harsh, less than loving ways, right? And so it's funny, I think I guess the larger the larger truth of what this boils down to for me is when we take care of ourselves well first, we have the ability to pour into others from the overflow, from an authentic desire to do it, right? But it feels like a pleasure. It feels like a privilege to pour into other people when I'm not doing it from the space of depletion versus when we are pouring into other people because it's what a good person would do or because we don't want to be perceived by other people as selfish. What ends up happening is we start showing up in our relationship dynamics from the space of depletion, which often makes us a less than loving version of ourselves, right? Um, yeah. So I don't know. I feel like this is maybe my argument for why we should care less about being a good person. And I'm joking as I say that. I don't actually think that we should care less about being a good person, but I think that there's a way that we should care less about performing good, right? The performative act of being a good person. I think that there's a way that each of us can trust ourselves to be in integrity with the way that we want to show up in this moment, and that may evolve. And we all will certainly have blind spots around what that looks like. But I think this thing of deciding who other people should be in order to be a good person in the world is how we start pointing the finger at other people without doing a lot of inventory of ourselves, right? And there's that thing of like in-depth psychology we talk a lot about. When you point a finger at someone else, there's three fingers pointing back at you, and that's around our own shadow work. And I think if I am super activated by someone else's choices or the way that I perceive them as being selfish, methinks thou dost protest too much, right? And I think that that is because so much of the work that I do ends up being centered around shadow work. It's this thing of, if I see someone else as being selfish, and that's sort of the like core rub that's coming up for me as I watch them moving through the world, the question around shadow work would be first, where am I selfish in my life? If that's something that I feel really activated by, am I selfish? Am I judging myself as selfish? On some level, do I believe that I'm selfish? Or, and this is the other aspect of, what might be considered like the golden shadow, where could I benefit from being a little bit more selfish, right? Where am I not taking up enough space with my needs and the truth of what I desire for myself. And, listen, if I had those 17,000 people in that dear woman's comment section, and I could sit down with them, I would say, y'all, let's get a little curious about why this feels so activating. Methinks thou dost for dust too much, right? And I think there's very little that is more activating to our society than a woman who has reclaimed her authentic pleasure. And here's why. I believe it becomes a reminder of the feminine essence within all of us that we have disavowed, that has been laying dormant. And when I talk about the feminine essence, I am talking about the eros and the life force and the trust that I am safe to follow the path of what my soul longs for. I think that we live in such a puritanical culture that has really taught us that we can't trust ourselves, and that the things that we long to experience and to do and to become are somehow needing to be contained and put inside of a cage. Otherwise, we will be unruly. Or, it's like a lot of the things around like that we are fundamentally sinful people, and that left to our best devices or unchecked, we will run amok. And I don't know what we will do. We will do some things that we need to be very concerned about, right? And to me, that just is really not in alignment with what I believe. I believe that all of us are fundamentally, from the intuitive space within, good and beautiful and divine, and that there's no reason that we can't trust ourselves. And, if we circle back to the example I'm giving of this reel, one of my favorite lines from Glennon Doyle's book, Untamed, if you haven't read it, it was one of the most potent books of my lifetime. Such a beautiful book. But she says in that book, there's a line where she says, there's no such thing as one-way liberation. And I have never not seen that be the case, that when one person is leaving a marital dynamic because it is no longer in alignment with their soul's truth, it is not possible for that not to also be true for the other soul, right? So I just don't believe that we were meant to keep one another in boxes, in cages, in something that is not true. Because, the battle cry ultimately of each of our souls is, don't fence me in. I came here for expansion. And if you think about what the opposite of death is, it is growth, it is aliveness, it is expansion. And so if we are not continuing to expand and grow and live in alignment with truth, we are deadened. We are just in that stagnant space of depression and of not fully living. And I think that is so much of what we are experiencing and have been experiencing on a societal level for so long. But that does not, eventually that will reach a breaking point, and we will often in some maladaptive ways have to have a reckoning with that lack of aliveness. And so, again, I don't really have an opinion quite often on what people should or shouldn't do morally in their lives, as long as we're all consenting adults, right? But I do think that there's a way that I just am so longing for us as a society, as a human race, to be able to meet one another in moments where you are doing something, you are showing up in this life in a way that feels unfathomable to me. It is so different than the way that I experienced life, and the things that have really kept me feeling good and safe in my skin and in this life. I'm just so hungry for us to be able to meet that with curiosity versus vitriol and contempt and polarization. I think there's so much about where we are right now, where there's just so much division and tribalism and, harm really being caused. And when I say harm, it's just that we are like forgetting that we belong to one another, that we are all essentially made from the same bits of the universe and the cosmos in human form for a while. And I really believe that that is what we are being called to remember. But I don't know that in those moments where we're focused on being a good person, we are in alignment with the highest truths of who we are as souls, right? Um, and so, yeah, I think this is, to me, the invitation for all of us is to really get curious. And I certainly am doing this myself. So please don't think that I believe I am immune to this work. I am not. This is the work of my lifetime, I think, of all of us, to just really get curious. Like, where am I being challenged to walk that walk of what I want to see in the world a little bit more? And can I be that? Let it begin with me. I think that conversation I was sharing with you all about with my girlfriends, I'm like, I think so often the highest form of our spirituality and maybe our activism is to be a living, breathing example of the type of people we want to see in the world. And none of us are going to do it perfectly. We are all going to have moments where it's like, ooh, not the highest version of myself, not exactly how I would want to show up on my best day. And I forgive me, I get to be human. But can I take a deep breath and take responsibility for that? And maybe make an amends where an amends needs to be made. And maybe when I see someone living in a way that is not in alignment with how I would live, maybe getting a little bit curious versus feeling like I know for sure from my space of righteousness that they are a bad person, because I've never lived in their skin. I've never walked the path that they are walking. And I don't know for sure, if I had, that I might not land in the same place that they've landed, right? But I digress. Um, so I pulled a card for this, and it's interesting. We'll see how we interpret this, but this is from those of you who are watching. And that is the Wild and Sacred Feminine deck, and this is an oracle deck, which I just love so much. So much poetry. The artwork is really beautiful in here. And this is the card that I pulled. It is Lakshmi, abundance. And as you can see, the artwork on that one, those of you who are watching, is really beautiful. But the shadow element of Lakshmi is scarcity. So I'm going to read this. It says, "The treasure that I invite you to receive is in your pocket right now, the pocket of your heart." The card of generosity, karma, and gifts, Lakshmi indicates that the angels of fortune hover around you, waiting to bestow their boons. Embrace them by sharing freely what you already have. You must empty your cup in order for it to be refilled. Lakshmi rests on a blooming lotus flower, the symbol of transcendence. Her 4 hands represent the 4 aims of human life: righteousness, pleasure, wealth, and liberation. The Hindu goddess of abundance says that when you follow your dharma, your purpose in life, contentment will follow. Give reverence to Lakshmi, with gold coins streaming out of her hands, for she is a goddess of prosperity, both material and spiritual. In fact, she embodies the gateway where the material becomes spiritual, the immanent transcendent. When you draw this card, expect a reckoning with how you define profit and gain. Do you measure it by wealth and possession, or by waking up from the trance of such illusions? Lakshmi teaches that while you don't need material wealth to feel rich, you must consciously choose to live a life of generosity. If you blame the world for withholding its treasure from you, try turning that thought around. What are you withholding from the world? As counterintuitive as it may seem, true abundance comes only to those who are unstinting in their largesse. Just as abundance nourishes you, you are here to nourish abundance. If you suffer from scarcity consciousness, the belief that you are neither good enough nor have enough, it is time to treasure your inner assets. Abundance is the realization that what you have is enough. Rather than obsessing on attracting more for yourself, think about what you can liberally give away: attention, support, goodwill, love. Don't obstruct the flow of wealth. Make it your aim to give more than you take, and know that what is yours will come to you. Blessings are ever flowering, but only to those with ample hearts appreciate the devotion behind Lakshmi's providential petals. Those last two words. You know, it's interesting. I love drawing a card on abundance because I think so often when we're afraid, and listen, I think whenever we are in the space of acting out or challenging other people in the way that they're showing up in the way that we've been talking about, we're in fear, right? There's something that we're afraid of. And I think that's where we can meet ourselves and others with so much compassion, because it's like when we're afraid, a lot of times, if you think about like an animal, and we are animals, but if you think about the way that animals respond, a lot of times when they're afraid, they can be vicious and they can sort of like lash out and thrash and sometimes be harmful, right? And that's like us when we're afraid. We often are afraid that there isn't enough. We often are afraid that we will be eviscerated. We are afraid that the structures that we have placed around our lives that we believe are keeping us safe might be challenged in a way that will lead to chaos and disorder. And all of those fears are so unbelievably human and understandable, right? And so all of this, I think, is not to make ourselves wrong for the ways that as humans, we are being challenged right now to be the compassionate witness of ourselves and those around us, but really to understand that all is well, always, right? When we are still, when we come back to our breath, when we trust in the source that we are, there is never anything that is out of alignment with the path of unfolding. And I think to me, that is a lot of what I bring into these conversations about relationships in general and how we can sort of trust in the unfolding and not feel like we need to control anyone or anything outside of ourselves in order to have peace in our skin. But what we are always in control of is the way that we believe that we are held, that we believe that there is enough, that we believe that what is meant for us will not miss us. And to me, that is abundance consciousness, right? And so, yeah, it feels like full circle to just be in that space of how do I show up in the world when I believe that I am held and when I believe that there is enough for everyone, and when I believe that fundamentally, if I take responsibility for the person that I want to be and showing up as that, that will create a ripple of the people that I come in contact with feeling a little bit more safe to be in the higher truth of who they are, and that they will then meet people, and in turn, the ripple continues, right? But I think that the belief system that we can eradicate fear with more fear is what I believe is dying on a collective level. You know, we've really tried the path of dominance and scarcity and fear and lack for long enough, right? And I think we're just being challenged to open our hearts and our minds to what might be possible if we believe that there is abundance, and there is an abundance of solutions to wherever we are in the space of stagnancy or collective challenges. When we come into the imaginal space, there are an abundance of solutions that we haven't even tapped into, but it becomes really hard to see abundance from the space of contraction, right? From the space of I'm just limited by what I'm afraid of. So I don't know. I think there's a way that if we put down the focus on being good, and there's a quote. Whose quote is that? Is it C.S. Lewis? I'll look it up later. But I think it is. And now that I don't have to be perfect, I get to be good, I think is the quote. And, you know, I don't know that I ever really had any feelings either way on that quote, but I don't really love that quote. I feel like I'm not that interested in being good anymore. I'm certainly not interested in being a good girl or a good woman or a good person. I'm interested in holding myself with as much compassion as I possibly can, so that compassion that I find for myself is able to overflow into those around me. I'm interested in allowing myself to be human and knowing that sometimes in my humanity, I may be perceived as less than a good person. And sometimes that'll be based on a misunderstanding. Sometimes it'll be based on my values not being in alignment with someone else's, and that's okay. But I don't think that means that I have to see them as bad or disconnect from my ability to see their humanity, even when they can't see mine, right? Um, I truly believe we are living through a moment in history where we are being asked to put down the belief that we can dehumanize other people to prove that it is wrong to dehumanize other people. Because in dehumanizing other people, we dehumanize ourselves. Um, and so I think so much of this thing of like attempting to identify who are the good people versus the bad people, I don't even know that it's a thing, but I certainly believe that it is a cage that we are putting our souls in that comes with some pretty significant outcomes that I think are no longer serving us. So that's my 2 cents. And I would say I will get off my soapbox, but this is my podcast, y'all. So I will not. I'm kidding. But yeah, those are just my thoughts on, I think, if I show up authentically, moment to moment, breath to breath, which is with as much self compassion as I can possibly muster, I think that is the best that any of us can possibly do. But, it's that Jack Kornfield quote, if my compassion does not begin with me, my compassion's not complete. So I got to start with the compassion within. And a lot of times I think when we are really struggling to be compassionate with those around us, there's a way that if we sort of follow the path back to ourselves, there's a real lack of compassion for ourselves that we're holding if we do a little shadow work to come to that understanding. So I'm going to wrap it up, but beautiful to spend some time with y'all. Thank you for listening. Please just be in such unbelievably grace-filled compassion for yourself today. I'm going to do my best to be doing the same for and with myself. And I will see you next time on What's My 100%. Side note, if you're interested, we still have some space. If you are interested in coming to Portugal, we're going to be staying at the W Hotel Algarve, and it is May 28th through June 2nd. And you can check out my website, DanaeLogan.com, or my Instagram, all of the things for more information on that. Would just love to see you in Portugal and dive deep into the space of how we do the thing of walking a little bit more of an authentic path. But the actual retreat is called Walking the Path of the Sovereign Soul. And if you're interested, I would love, love, love to spend this time with you in Portugal in May. Otherwise, be well, take good care of yourselves, and I will see you again soon. Speak to you again soon, my loves.